boundaries is everything. We take it for granted as we go through it. And as this topic came up and I started to look at my life, I started to take stock in my life and realize there was plenty of times that I didn't set boundaries, or I set boundaries, but I didn't respect the boundaries. Or I set the wrong boundaries. And so I want to have a conversation around the types of boundaries that I think you can have, the categories of boundaries that come into play, the process of how I look at boundaries today. And then I want to break down some specific boundaries around money for you. So that's kind of our journey for the day. But here's the thing. I really want you to look at boundaries in this way. Our job living, I believe, is to live intentionally into the alignment of what we were called to do and be while we're here on this earth. And without boundaries, I mean, because I think that our intentional joy is found within the framework of those boundaries. And when we don't have boundaries, it's the thief of our joy. And joy is a healing. Yeah, I mean, we talk about it, but it's a healing element. It is the thing that creates richness in life beyond wealth. It's the thing that creates a relationship that has meaning and that type of thing. And so I'm going to walk through a couple things that happened so you start to see where boundaries can show up first and how maybe I screwed them up. And look, I'm human. I'm going to mess this up over and over again. And the key is that if we learn from them, then we don't repeat it. And so I really want to walk you through a couple of things that you'll start to see how they start to play out in our world. So I look at boundaries as a moat around my life. It's there to protect my ability to experience intentional joy. It's there to protect the things that I want in my life as much as to keep out the things that I don't want in my life. And when I didn't respect those boundaries, I found myself doing some things that didn't turn out so well. For instance, I found myself taking on bad clients. Okay. In the sense that these clients either wouldn't pay, didn't pay, or they were problematic, or they were demanding clients, unrealistic expectations, always trying to get scope creep, all those things. You might have some of those today. I was keynoting in DC, and we were having a conversation just around this, and in fact, someone brought it up, and they thought that they had, system issues within their company. And I said, no, you have boundary issues within your team. And when we have boundary issues, we start to take on things problematic. The other thing that I found myself doing is that I started to make bad business decisions. When we start to make our decisions from circumstance, from what is going on specifically in the moment, we tend to bring emotions into a decision. When we make emotional decisions, tendency is that they haven't been fully thought out, haven't been fully vetted. And so that becomes a challenge for us. Now I got into bad partnerships because of it. I got into bad team people where I brought people on and said, oh, I can fix it. I can make it better. The other thing that happens is that you end up in bad relationships. Now, many of you may have experienced this. I literally was in, and Brendan knows the relationships that I was in prior to my beautiful bride, who the reason I met my beautiful bride of 11 years now, we just crossed the 11-year mark, is because of Brendan, because I was leaving one of Brendan's events. Some of you may have heard the story, and there she was in an airport. And so being the stalker I was, I didn't let her go without getting a business card. And here we are married 11 years this past month. And so here's the thing, but we find ourselves in these relationships. How many times have you been in a situation where you stayed in a relationship a bit too long? Where you stayed in an employment relationship a bit too long, where you sat back and you started to look at it and say, this isn't my life. What am I doing? Why am I living this life? Back in I'm not going to age myself. So 1989, I was working for one of the large consulting firms in downtown Los Angeles. And it was a late Friday night. 10:30 at night. I'm staring out at the skyline of downtown Los Angeles, which is actually a nice sight to look at. And I'm sitting there with this aching in my heart and my soul, realizing that I'm living someone else's life, realizing that this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing, but it's what I got educated in. It's what my license was in. It's what the expectations are. It's the journey path for my profession. All of that, until I sat back and said, but wait a second, and I didn't call them boundaries at the time, but what are the boundaries in my life? What is the thing that I'm meant to do? And I literally walked in and quit that night. But I think that we find ourselves in these relationships, and they can be professional, personal, and everything that don't serve us. And yet we stay because they say, the enemy you're with. And we get comfortable. It's that comfortable pain that you can tolerate. And I'm hoping that what we do with this is we start to understand these things. Other thing that happened is I end up in bad investments. We can talk about the Ponzi scheme. I'll probably bring that up. The reason I ended up in the Ponzi scheme is I did not follow my boundaries. I didn't follow my rules. I didn't follow the principles. I didn't follow the things that would protect me. And then last, in the process of doing this, I didn't have boundaries and rules and things in there, and ended up with health issues. Okay. Now, I lived a healthy life, and no one can determine whether you're going to get cancer or not get cancer. And, I wasn't a candidate for it, but there's some things that I didn't do. And I say this because there's some of us out there that don't like to go to doctors. I was one of them. Oh, I feel good. And since I feel good, I don't need to go to doctors. Here's what happened. And I was at risk of losing my bladder because the tumor was so large, 7.5 centimeters. And the reason it got so large is when we moved down to where we live by the beach, I didn't have any doctors, and I just got lazy. But I used to go and get checked all the time. I used to check my blood levels. I used to check all of that. I had boundaries around the things I did around my health, but I ignored it for 7 years. It may not have stopped the cancer, but had I lived within those boundaries, I would have sat back, and at least we would have caught the tumor before it ever got to be so life-threatening at 7.5 centimeters. And so I say this not for any other reason, but to understand that boundaries permeate every part of your life, as Brendan said. And if we're not careful, it starts to define our life in a way that doesn't serve us.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.